But let's forget the radical environmentalists.
If you are polluted, you are also a violator.
Freedom and a safe environment goes hand in hand.
Our last speaker is from Greece. His name is Nikos Sotirakopoulos. He's a professor at Ayn Rand University and a visiting fellow at Ayn Rand Institute. Nikos also has a PhD in political sociology at Kent University. He has been a lecturer at British universities for 10 years. He's a regular guest as RIM at British Media. He's the author of 2 books. And do you know the Pink Floyd album, The Dark Side of the Moon? Well, Nikos isn't going to talk about the moon, but he's going to talk about the dark side of environmentalism. And there will be plenty of time for questions, so feel free to ask questions in the end. There's no rush, and Nikos is expecting it. So, Nikos, the stage is yours. Ευχαριστώ.
Ευχαριστώ, παρακαλώ. Thank you very much, Beatrice. Thank you very much for being here. So the question is, should we be free market environmentalists? And my answer is no. And this is not because I don't take our relationship with nature seriously. Actually, I think our relationship with nature is an issue of life and death. If we make mistakes in the way we relate with nature, it can have very, very devastating consequences. But exactly because I believe that it is important to understand what our relationship with nature should be, this is exactly why I'm not an environmentalist. Because I think that environmentalism as an ideology, as a philosophy, but also the environmental movement, get completely wrong what is our relationship with nature. Now, when I say about a movement or a set of ideas or a philosophy, whether it is good or whether it is bad, what is my criteria? What is my standard? How do I evaluate a movement as good or as bad? And I have only one standard. I have only one criterion. And that criterion is human life. That criterion is human flourishing, which means the good life. For me, the way to judge something is, does it contribute to human beings having a life that will be long, healthy, prosperous, creative, meaningful? That's what I mean by human flourishing. This is my standard. This is why, for example, I am so passionate about the idea that is important to all of us, the idea of freedom. Because how can you have a flourishing life without freedom? We need freedom, first of all, to figure out what is going to make life meaningful to us. And for each one of us, it's a different answer. We need freedom to understand the world. We need freedom to figure out what we do, to create, to produce, to innovate. This is why freedom is not just a luxury, not something that we use in sunny days, but freedom is an existential necessity. In order to live a good life, not just to survive, like a prehistoric person in a cave, but to live the good life, we need freedom as much as we need to breathe, literally. Within this context, though, the context, let's say, of the good life, of the flourishing life, what is then our relationship with nature? Our relationship with nature is that we constantly need to intervene in our environment. We constantly need to improve our environment. Because what we're facing is not nature which is pristine and pure and friendly towards us. If this was the case, throughout history of humanity, life expectancy wouldn't be 30 years old. What we find out there is a nature which is constantly posing threats to us, challenges to us. So what we need to do is we need to shape nature in a way that accommodates our needs. We need to build shelters. We need to build roads in order to have free trade, as we mentioned in the previous discussion. We need to fight the predators that nature unleashes against us. And by mastering nature, by putting, let's say, by exerting control over nature, actually, we make our environment safer. And of course, we're facing many challenges today. Climate change is one of these challenges. But think about it. Was there any time in human history that nature was safer for human beings? Safer in terms of dying from floods, dying from extreme weather, extreme cold, extreme heat. So if you see climate-related deaths in the last 200 years at the time of the Industrial Revolution, they've gone down like that. So the more we intervene with nature and doing it right using our mind, the safer we make our natural environment. And also something else. The more we intervene in nature, the more we master nature, the more able are we to enjoy nature, to appreciate nature as something beautiful, not as something which is after to kill us. Can you imagine trying to have a hike without your plastic shoes, your plastic-made backpack, without your phone where if you are lost, someone comes to find you? Within the industrial civilization, which is the civilization of mastery over nature, a hike is a beautiful experience. Without the industrial civilization, a hike is literally a horror movie. So this is my standard when I evaluate a movement. Is it good for human life and human flourishing? And that's my only standard. That's why I reject communism, I reject fascism, and that's why I'm passionate for freedom. Now, the crucial question is this a standard which is shared by environmentalism and the environmental movement? If environmentalism shares this standard that yes, our number one priority is human life and human flourishing, then we can say, look, we disagree on some things with these people, but we agree on the basics. Therefore, we can be allies. And my not so hot take today is that this is not the standard of environmentalism. Human life and human flourishing is not the standard of environmentalism. And I will prove it to you. Actually, environmentalism has a different standard. The standard is having as little impact on nature as possible. It's not making nature more hospitable to human beings. It's more protecting nature from human beings. And let's see why this is the case. Let's have a very quick 3-minute crash course in the history of environmentalism. And the environmental movement comes around in the 1960s, which is a time where many ideas that question industrial society are very popular. These are the ideas of the counterculture, the ideas of the new left. And these are ideas that tell us that all the aspirations that common people have to own stuff, to have a nice house, to travel, to, God forbid, consume, that this is something bad. They even tell us that technology and science is something to be questioned. That is something very central in the new left. And they are telling us that human aspiration itself is a problem, which was something big and new. At least the old left was pretending to tell us that, you know what, we follow us and we're going to have more stuff. The new left is telling us, follow us so that we make sure that you have less stuff. Literally. Now, within this intellectual framework, it's not surprised that environmentalism took that route that it took. And actually, it's even more. It's even worse. Because very soon, it wasn't a movement against human aspiration, but it was a movement against human beings themselves. Who was the first very prominent environmentalist? When I say very prominent, he was appearing at what was the equivalent of the Joe Rogan show of the time on Prime TV. It was a guy called Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book in '68 called The Population Bomb. And his idea was there are too many human beings on planet Earth. And this guy, it's something unbelievable. He's still around, by the way. He's been around for what, like 50 years? And he's given all these catastrophic predictions. And every time he's wrong. He reminds me of this cartoon, you know, the coyote and the beep beep. Who is the guy who fails all the time? This is Paul Ehrlich for you. But he did something disastrous. he had an impact in a culture that said that there are too many human beings out there. Now think about it. What does it mean to say there are too many human beings? It means that now humanity is a threat. To whom? To nature. But what does this mean? It means that now your standard is not human life, your standard is nature. And now suddenly humanity is a threat. In the 1970s, environmentalism gets its own philosophy. It's a philosophy that was called deep ecology. And it had some of its leaders, someone like the philosopher Arne Naess. And deep ecology is a movement that the basic message is green collectivism and green egalitarianism. Collectivism because its main message is the earth is one. It's one body. They call it the Gaia. And every single living organism is a cell within that body. But here's the trick, and here's where the egalitarianism comes in. The message is that every living being is of equal value. So deep ecology is a reaction to the idea that humanity is special, is a reaction to anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism, what does that mean? I'm Greek, it's a Greek word, but simply it's a reaction against the Enlightenment. The reaction against the idea that human being is the measure of all things. And I realize that someone might hear the phrase, all living beings are equal, and you might say, yeah, this is cute. I love cats, I'm a nerd for whales, I love living beings. But here's the trick. Try to think what is the logical conclusion of thinking and claiming that all living beings, whether it's animals, human beings, plants, are equal. And actually, you don't have to think it. One famous deep ecologist did a thought experiment that makes this very, very clear. He said, picture this. You're in a mountain and it's very cold, it's snowing outside. And there is a small house in the mountain. And within the house, there is a baby in a cradle and a snake. Now, if you throw out the baby, obviously it dies. If you throw out the snake, it dies. If you leave the baby with the snake, you figure out what happens. And he asked a simple question, what do you do? And the implication was that if you take out the snake to save the baby, you're not a true radical, you're not a true deep ecologist. And in the following years, we saw many such misanthropic views from deep ecology. There were deep ecologists who said that, should we really help Africa with its hunger? Should we really alleviate the hunger in Africa? Do we really need more people, quote unquote, they meant Africans around? They were the people who, when the HIV pandemic, when HIV came out in the 80s, they said that this is the natural defense of planet Earth against people. Therefore, maybe it's something to be welcomed. Now, I know what will be your objection. You will say, look, Nikos, you are doing here something very sneaky. You found the two worst crazy people in the environmental movement, and you are straw-manning the whole movement like that. These are just outsiders. Well, are they? How many times have you heard the phrase, human beings are a plague on Earth? I've heard it many times. I've heard it many times from people who are celebrated, from people who are celebrities. What happened to these deep ecologists? They after that, they stood in the boards of respectable groups. A guy even got his prime TV show. Do you know Captain Paul Watson? He was the guy who was sabotaging the whale ships. He got the equivalent of a Netflix show. But forget for a second these crazy guys. Do you remember during COVID, this horrible phrase that says, nature is healing? I hated this so much. But if you think about it, it is it follows perfectly from this idea that if your standard is nature, then indeed human beings dying is something which is good for nature. It's bad for human beings, but who cares about that? But let's forget the radical environmentalists. Let's go to the most moderate environmentalists. Because you could say, look, obviously they don't share this standard, the standard of having as little impact in nature. And I would say then think again. Let's take the issue again of climate change, which is again very important, and I totally recognize this. Supposedly, environmentalists want to make sure that we get rid of dirty forms of energy, and you would expect that then they would be in favor of cleaner forms of energy that also make sure that we have energy and we don't die. Because, I don't know if you've understood it, higher prices of energy or lack of energy for us is just an inconvenience. Like, where am I going to charge my iPhone? Or, oh my God, my electricity bill is too high. For billions of people, it's an issue of life and death. So how does the mainstream environmental movement deal with nuclear energy, for example? Literally zero emissions. You would expect they would be fully in favor, right? Of course, they're radically opposed to it. Radically opposed to it. Now you could say, okay, Nikos, you know what, but there's the danger of an accident, or what we do with nuclear waste, which all these answers are obviously very easy to find. Okay, let's say they are scientifically literate. What about hydroelectric power? Can we all agree? Hydroelectric power, literally zero emission. The major environmental groups are against also hydroelectric power. Do you know why? Because it interferes with the migration routes of some types of fish, like salmon. Notice again their standard here. Who cares about people having cheap energy, having the energy that they need to live? What about the salmons? But I will give you the last example, which some of you might find silly, but I think it's the most telling about what we're dealing here. Do you remember the plastic straws? I'm from Greece. We drink our Freddo espresso or frappe. We love our plastic straws. Actually, I have a stock of plastic straws that will take me through the apocalypse. Notice how much energy the green movement has spent in banning plastic straws. And my question to you is a very simple one. Why? Are plastic straws really a threat to anything that has to do with nature? If you do your research, it takes like 20 seconds of Googling. You will notice that the vast amount of plastics in the oceans comes from societies that have nothing to do with Western capitalist societies. But from that plastic, actually someone did the math. The percentage of the plastic in the ocean which comes from plastic straws is 0.00000. It's like 2 lines of zeros, 0.1%. And you mention this to an environmentalist and you ask them, so what's the point? And at the end of the discussion, do you know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you, well, at least we're doing something. You're doing something towards what? You're not saving anything. You're not protecting anything. You're doing something in terms of, oh, at least we pay our dues, we suffer, we give up something. Oh. So then your goal is not even to protect something. You want to make sure that we feel uncomfortable, that we give up something. In that case, I can see clearly what your standard is. And your standard is that basically you've become a nihilist. You don't stand for something, you just want to put a cost on an activity that doesn't harm anyone. So this is why, at the end of the day, I think that environmentalism is, first of all, incompatible, obviously, with freedom, but most importantly, it's incompatible with human life. Because its standard is having as little impact in nature as possible. But life requires impact on nature. Lack of impact has a different name, and that name is death. We cannot survive without having impact on nature. And as long as we are free and we want to live good lives, we will have impact in nature. And because environmentalism is radically opposed to that, I want to shout from the rooftops that I am not an environmentalist. And just one more thing. Personally, I think that free market environmentalism is conceding so much to an ideology that doesn't deserve it. It fails to understand what environmentalism really stands for. I mean, imagine this. Imagine if someone looked, let's say a movement we all agree is horrible. Let's say someone looked at fascism and they said, well, look, fascists wanted the trains to run on time. Fascists were against bank robbers. Well, I want the trains to run on time. I'm against bank robberies. Therefore, I'm going to call myself a free market fascist. No, no, no. The essence of fascism is not that the trains run on time. The essence of fascism is the naked collectivism and authoritarianism. And equally, the essence of environmentalism is not reducing pollution. The essence of environmentalism is something completely different. And I will finish with this. If we keep letting people be free, we're going to make our environment more and more hospitable and safe to us. We're going to deal with challenges like climate change, and we're going to go through it. We're going to fix it, again, by using our mind and ingenuity, the thing that made the environment so hospitable for us for the first time in human history. So freedom and a safe environment goes hand in hand. Freedom and environmentalism, no, they cannot go together. It's either or. It's either freedom or environmentalism. And every day of the week, I choose freedom. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nikos. We already have a question there and another there. Okay, we have 4 questions, 5. Okay, let's start. August to start first, so let's.
So first you choose what freedom, right? But you didn't consider one of the thing that you give freedom to people, and there's humanity. There are selfish people that doesn't care about other people. So what's your opinion on this?
So there are people, first of all, if you don't care about other people, you're not selfish, you're stupid. Because if you really care about yourself, you want to, be surrounded by good people. But you're very right. There are people who will abuse that freedom. For example, people who will pollute, let's say, a river from which we drink with poison. Or people who will do things that we're going to have a deadly impact on the rest of us. But this is why we have rule of law. And it's not very easy to say where is the threshold. So, for example, how much can your car pollute? Right? This is not very easy. But again, the fact that I'm for freedom does not mean that I am for breaching other people's rights. So let's make something very clear. Freedom and your protection, your safety from being polluted, from being poisoned by someone who dumps waste in the water, go 100% together. Now, of course, we have the so-called tragedy of the commons. So to whom does this lake belong? So in a society where we would have more private property, this would be simpler. But please don't let me be misunderstood. Your individual rights protect you from someone who would say, oh, freedom means, what do I do with this nuclear waste? Oh, I'm going to throw it to your garden. Of course not. But thank you for your question.
Okay. Next question. Yeah.
Well, first things, I just want to thank you because I'm very tired of listening constantly on the media and many other people about the environment this, climate change this. For me, it's very, very exaggerated. And your example of the straw was completely right. I already knew that. But that proves that it's very exaggerated, all of this. But one thing that I kind of disagree. I think is because freedom it not goes hand to hand with the environment. I believe in environment. I don't like pollution. I love nature, and I think it's possible to have freedom with conscience going hand with nature and environment. But you don't agree with that?
Wait, let's make sure we speak the same, we use the same terms. When I say that freedom is good for, I don't mean the environment in the abstract. I mean the environment that human beings live. Now, notice though that life is a long-term process, right? So for example, if you take a picture of a particular moment in the 19th century, let's say in Edinburgh or in Manchester, yeah, there was a lot of pollution. But also, guess what? There were people living in houses. And there were people who were not working 12 hours every day in the cold or in the sun. And there was a guy, what was his name, who wrote a book, Out of Poverty. So he went to sweatshops, which are, I mean, it's dirty, horrible environment. But it asked people, why do you work in this quote unquote sweatshop? And we talk about people who were not like slaves. They were people who by their own will they work there. They said, well, I have a roof and I get money that I can put my food on the table. So in the long term, the freer we are, the more hospitable and accommodating nature is towards us. We have shelter. Or think about something like, let's get to the core. Think about something like climate change. Would you rather have to face such a challenge being poor without the technology of an industrial society? Or would you rather deal with it by having all the technology that we have now? And imagine the technology that we would have if we truly cared about solving the problem. Think about geoengineering, think about carbon capture. I mean, sky is the limit. So totally freedom means a safer environment. For whom? A safer environment for human beings. At some point, this might mean fewer forests, sure. But also it will mean people living longer. And let me tell you also something. Today, as societies get richer, of course, because we appreciate, we plant more trees and we end up with more forests. So I don't see a contradiction there. Thank you.
Hi. During COVID, my son was at home, as many kids, and there were these TV shows like teaching instead of school. And in science, there was an episode, and I totally shut down the TV at that point and stopped watching it. I came to the room and it was like, the earth has parasites and parasites are men. And so our kids are being put these images in their heads, and it's totally, I don't know, there are no words for it. And I just wanted to make a connection between my colleague here and the words of the former presenter. Because yes, I truly agree with you, but I also know that it's a problem and we need to approach people and we need to get them on our side. So yeah, well, that's it. Thank you.
So this is so important. This is the biggest issue, right? How do we get people on our side? Actually, first, let me address the first part, the parasite. I've seen it many times. Imagine if someone said, the Jews are a parasite on earth, or Greeks are a parasite on earth, or any group is a parasite on earth. People will be up in arms. But if you say every human being is a parasite on earth, great. I mean, shall we name names? I'll name names. David Attenborough in the UK, national treasure. National treasure, a guy who times and again says human beings are parasites. Like, how can you, like, what do we do with parasites? We extinct them. Now, I'm not saying he wants to extinct human beings, but he's creating this misanthropy. How can this guy be national treasure? Anyway, you said something very important, or you touched upon something important. How do we persuade more people? And my view is, we are not going to persuade them if we tell them that the people who call them parasites, They have the moral high ground. We should tell them, no, these people, you should see them for what they are, and then we can have discussions about how we fix the problems. It's like this horrible thing that I hear all the time, even by supposedly clever people like Jordan Peterson. Well, communism is good in theory, but didn't work in practice. Well, you know what, people? If it was good in theory, let's try it again. I mean, seriously. If I try to make a steak and I fail, but it was a good recipe in theory, I'm gonna try it again. No. Communism was horrendous and evil in theory, and this is why every single time it failed in practice. So we should go always for the moral high ground. But it is very important what you said. We need also to see where people are coming from. So I would try to see what's your context here. Why do you care about this? I care because I love the whales. Okay, I also love the whales. So I try to see where they're coming from, and I would try to meet them. But when I meet them where they are, I don't mean conceding the moral high ground. I would try to understand their context. But it's very important, because if we just persuade ourselves in this room, we're not going to do that much. And this goes for everything in the freedom movement. Like our goal should be, we need to capture not just, I hate the phrase hearts and minds, but we really need to capture hearts and minds. People need to get passionate about our ideas. Thank you.
So I very much appreciate your lecture, and I would like to ask you about where do you stand in the following question. Do you recognize the difference between environmentalism and ecologism? So basically, ecologism deals along with environment with social ecology. Now, how we can separate social ecology from the supposed cause of environmentalism?
Well, social ecology, first of all, was a particular part of the environmental movement, which back then was called the ecology movement. So in my mind, they're the same thing. Now, ecology, I would even say so for example, in Greek, we call the environmentalist ecologist. I mean, I'm Greek, ecologia, that's literally a Greek term, right? In my view, they're the same thing. Now, again, concern for the environment, which for me is 100% legitimate, I would use this as a different term from environmentalism, which is an ideology. But I wouldn't distinguish between, because environmentalism is a follow through, let's say, from the ecology movement. Thank you. And I saw you were nodding. You knew Paul Ehrlich. That's cool.
Thank you. We have 4 more questions, as far as I know. So let's to the next question.
Congratulations for your understandable English. I want to speak about how do you resolve the psychopaths. Psychopath, you can't what is the solution?
The solution with psychopaths or psychopaths? Oh, psychopaths. There is only one solution, which is to set the light on them and show to people who they are. I mean, let's make a thought experiment. Let's say we eliminate fossil fuels. At the moment, fossil fuel give us 80% of energy. At the moment, last time I checked, was 2 billion people live in energy poverty. What is going to happen if we eliminate fossil fuels? Or they're going to say, okay, let's not eliminate, let's phase them out. And replace them with what? Because as long as we don't replace it exactly the same day with something which is equally available, equally cheap, and equally usable, people are going to die. And they are going to die in amounts that are unimaginable. Pol Pot and Mao are going to be a walk in the park compared to what is going to happen if people don't have access to energy. Because energy means the room in the hospital if the machines are going to work. Energy means if you're going to have heating in your house or if you're going to burn dead animals, which is what they do a lot in the developing world. So I'm shouting, but that's just because I think it's so evil, so bad when people are just throwing like that. Well, let's eliminate fossil fuel, which means let's take away the life source on which billions of people rely on. And we should make this clear that your ideas will literally lead to death. Literally. I mean, the connection is not difficult to find. So we should expose them. That's what we should do. Thank you. Thank
We have 3 more questions, if that's fine.
Of course.
Okay.
So, I didn't know there was like an argument for like against the use of hydroelectrical power.
What?
So
I'll tell you.
because like Brazil is like almost like 80% of hydroelectrical power, and in that case, like there wouldn't be the argument that you said before. But thinking about it for like the northern countries or some like Pacific, like South Pacific, it's actually a good argument that okay, we're gonna damage like the salmon because it's like I love sushi, so if we don't have the salmon, so that's a problem for us also, not only for the well-being of the fish.
You know what's a bigger problem than, by the way, I'm also a big consumer of salmon. Do you know what's a bigger problem than not having salmon? Your wife giving birth and the hospital not having energy. That's a bigger problem than salmon. A bigger problem than salmon is you not having heating. Or you are in an emergency, you don't have a fuel or a car to drive. That's a bigger problem than salmon. Now, which is the biggest environmentalist group in the world? The Sierra Club. A few years ago, I haven't checked more recently, in their websites where they present their triumphs, they present how many times they have opposed hydroelectric dams. Alex Epstein, who I think is the best thinker when it comes to environment, mentioned this in his last book. Persuade me that these people really care about clean energy. And I cannot be persuaded. I cannot be persuaded. We don't want fossil fuels. Oh, but we don't want nuclear. But we don't want hydro. Then what do you want? You don't care. That's what you want. Like, you don't care what's going to happen to people. And again, you should be made, like, people should know that. Why do so many people think that these are the good guys? That's what we're up. That's what we're like up against. But yeah, gay for salad. Yeah, here. I don't have a question. I just wanted to add some comments and say that I agree with you when you say that environmentalism it's a wrong idea. I think the very end of the day, it's just a narrative that was built to put in people's minds. It's all about social control. It's all about controlling individuals. The thing is, we just talked about carbon credits before, because the end of this is to try to control people by carbon credits. And by the way, China is using another system called social control, which is if the person that has good behavior, that this person has some benefits from governments. And another thing, I don't know if you heard about these CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. This is another way to control of individuals. It's all about narrative and social control. Thank you. So you mentioned though something important, which is the control aspect. Let me take it one step though beyond that, which is why is it that so many people, so many good people accept it? And the reason is because it has the veneer of science. And let me tell you something. I believe the scientists. All right, that's a weird segue, but I think that there is very solid science that shows that indeed there's a problem here with climate change. But here's the thing. From the scientist who does the research till the policymaker who tells you about carbon cut or whatever they tell us, there are 4 degrees of separation. The scientist who does the research, the scientist who decides what research is how we cut and pick from different pieces of research. Then the person who decides how do we present this research to the public and policymakers. And the 4th level is the policymaker who is going to tell you what to do. So when we hear climate change is, the science says that this needs to be done about climate change, it is not the case. And there's a very simple way to understand this. Do you remember the Kyoto Agreement or the Paris Agreement? I always ask a very simple question. Again, I believe every word of every scientist who has written this report. But ask a very simple idea. If we follow that, if we follow the Kyoto program, what is going to be the impact in 100 years in terms of temperature? How much are we going to delay climate change? A brilliant guy with numbers, Bjorn Lomborg, ran the numbers. So Kyoto, that would cost trillions. Do you know how much it would delay climate change? 5 years. As he put it, the guy in Bangladesh who would get the sea level here in 2100, he will get in 2105. But because of all the measures, he's not going to be as rich as he could have been, and then he's going to be in big trouble. So please don't think for a minute that I don't respect science or I think that the scientists are corrupt or whatever. But what the science says, compared to what the European commissioner or the journalist is going to give you, is a different story. Do we have it?
Yeah, thank you, Nikos. We are going to have the last question right now.
So, okay. You propose some kind of list solutions to the problem of climate change and carbon dioxide. And when you say that you agree and you trust the scientists, what about the scientists who disagree and who are silenced, who say that climate change is actually a hoax, that it is not true at all? Why do we accept the premises of our enemies who are trying to force an ideology on us when there are data that contradict the idea of climate change? For example, that carbon dioxide is 0.044% of our atmosphere, and the fact that vegetations actually require CO2 in order to grow, and we need plants in order to live because they produce oxygen, and the fact that most of the emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere are actually from submarine volcanic activity. Why do we accept the rest? Because science is not a democracy. When there is actually dissidence, we may actually want to listen to what they are saying. For example, Isaac Newton was not believed for a very long time. He wasn't less right just because there were less people believing what he was saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, if I gave you an answer on that, you should say this guy is a bullshitter and we should never invite him again. Because if I gave you a technical answer on that, it would imply that I have any idea about actually reading the site. But here's what I have an idea of. I can judge from the interpretation what type of people have done this research. And it seems to me, again, it's very possible that I'm not good in judging this. I mean, I'm good in football and history. These are the things that I'm good at. But to the extent that my judgment has any validity, I think that there is good science that says that indeed there is a trend which is upward. But again, this is not the issue. The issue is how do we understand it and what are we going to do about this? And I didn't give a capitalist solution. I just said that how has humanity dealt with every single problem till now? We let people think, we let people understand relations of cause and effect, and we're having something as a goal, a standard, which again for me is human life, human flourishing. We figure it out. And this is what we're going to do with climate change. This is what we're going to do with rising sea levels. And go to Netherlands, they've done it already. Israel, for God's sake, are making drinking water from seawater, am I right? So the solutions are there as long as people are left free to think and to create for it and to act. That's what I'm advocating. This is not a political agenda. It's just that this is how human beings survive and thrive. We see a problem, We identify it and we make the environment better for us, friendlier for us. And this is what we're going to do again if people are left free to do it. Thank you. And can I say a big thank you to ESFL for inviting us and being very hospitable. We really appreciate it, and thank you very much.